to learn from what's around us and then to collaborate with each other around them. And there's no real pride of ownership in the idea or the outcome or the connecting of the dots. Instead of there's just like a real celebration of how each of us does connect those dots and then what that leads to.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with my friend, Kelley Hecht. Kelley, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thank you. I was like a little nervous and sad for today because I've been so excited to do this, but now I don't want it to be over.
Well, we'll just make it as long as possible.
Okay. Well, or can I invite myself back before we've even started?
Totally.
That'd
yes,
okay.
Already.
Okay, now I can relax and breathe. It's so good to be here.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm so excited for our conversation. Do you want to start by just telling everybody a little bit about you, your background, where you are today, and kind of what brings you to our conversation?
Yeah. First of all, for those who have had to hear this before, I apologize in advance. It's probably like, yeah, we know, we get it, Kelley. But, I think the interesting thing about my career journey is some of it was very intentional and some of it was very accidental. So my name is Kelley Hecht. I'm based in New York City. I am a mom of 2 teenage kids that I am navigating this crazy world with. And I currently work at a team at AWS, Amazon Web Services, that is dedicated to the specific needs of how nonprofit organizations or technology companies helping nonprofit organizations utilize AWS cloud services to solve the problems in our sector. And I came to this job super fortunately, but somewhat accidentally, which is sort of a theme throughout my career. So talking with you today has been a very short journey because from the minute I heard you speak for the first time, I became obsessed with hearing and listening and thinking through things with you. You turned me into like a voracious collaborator with you is how I think of our partnership. And I'm so grateful for it.
Oh my God, me too. It does feel like when you meet people who are just kind of processing the same things as you or thinking about things the same or wondering the same things, it's just like instantaneous to get connected and curious together. So I'm also really grateful for you. And I would love we had a conversation recently where you shared a little bit about kind of your hopes and dreams for the sector, like you, Kelley. And I'm also wondering if we can start there a little bit, because I think hearing you talk, I was like, oh yeah, this is also why I love her. And I think people should hear it from you.
I have so many hopes and dreams for this industry. I mean, let me start by saying I chose this industry. For as long as I can remember, I knew I wanted to work at the American Cancer Society very specifically. And I quit a for-profit, well-paying job in New York City to basically be a temp while working 2 restaurant jobs on the side to pay rent in New York City so that I could work in this sector. So there was something about it that always really excited me and interested me. So fast forward a couple decades later, what excites me about this industry is its impact, which is funny because I don't think we really think of ourselves as having been, pace setters or leaders in the space of impact, but we really are. I mean, we are solving massive problems. We are addressing world issues and local community issues in ways that are so profoundly important and needed and are having that impact, right? So that part of it is so humbling and exciting and filled with like pride and all those great things. And I find myself like constantly referencing Penelope Burke because I remember starting in this industry when she was had come out with this novel concept of donor-centric fundraising. And it was such a big thing and everyone was so excited about it and everyone was passing around the book and the content. And I'm like looking back and thinking, wow, that book was written, I think 50 years ago now. Like, how are we still talking about this? We've solved all these other major problems. We've created incredible networks for food insecurity. We've created incredible technical solutions to address homelessness and to address, mental health challenges. And yet some of these things that we've known are challenges, we still don't seem to have made the choices that have solved for them. And so that part makes me some days, on my bad days, frustrated, and on my other days committed to, like, really, I think it's possible for us to do what we mean to do and want to do. And I get really excited to encourage and support and navigate how to do that with the folks that are committed to it.
I love that. And I think that I don't know a lot of people in the sector that don't oscillate between kind of like the fist shaking at the like system or why things are the way they are without the like, hopeful optimism about what's possible when. So I think like that, holding that balance and having those days is probably something everybody can relate to in kind of whatever corner they're in. And before we clicked record, we started to talk about kind of like how our relationship started and grew, and we've gotten to work together. I mean, we've become personal friends. We've gotten to work together on fundraising AI. I just feel like anytime we're going to be closely in the same place, we're like, how do we see each other and spend time together? And I think it's happened so quickly because when we met, or the first time we met, I was speaking about kind of like fundraiser vulnerability. And like I shared in my session some of my own fears and insecurities and tools that helped me overcome a lot of my resistance and challenges as a fundraiser. And maybe in that like opening and in that like authenticity, it kind of opened a door for us to connect really quickly. And I think what I appreciate about you is as you've sat in a lot of different roles with a lot of different hats, it seems to me like you have always been authentically you. And people have known you in a lot of different roles. And you like strike me as somebody that kind of, no matter what seat you're sitting in, you're you. And so I'm curious, like, how you think about like authenticity in yourself as a person, and then in how you kind of like show up and occupy space in our sector.
Okay, so that was very kind of you, first of all. I feel very like uncomfortable because hearing all those accolades and kind words is uncomfortable sometimes for me. I had an executive coach once who used to tell me to learn to catch the ball when someone throws you a compliment and not like deflect it. So thank you. Calling me authentic and describing me in that way in every role I've had is like probably the greatest compliment you could give me. It's super important to me that hierarchy and brand and funding and access are not the drivers of things. I remember I was at the conference in August. The first time I heard you speak, you did not have a big enough room or big enough audience or enough time, in my opinion. And I remember sitting in the back I had like a legal pad, because despite the fact that I work at the most widely adopted technology company, I take notes on paper. And I was like, I was just writing. And I think in addition to your vulnerability, one of the things I'm very drawn to about you and the way you lead and the way that you do your work is that you are a constant learner. And so that shows up as curiosity and to steal the word back for you, authentic interest in whatever it is you're learning about, whoever it is you're talking to. It's very real. And at Amazon, they have leadership principles, and they're sort of guides for how we do our work. And my favorite is learn and be curious. Like I love that. However, I am not an academic learner. And like, I never went and got my master's. I wasn't always that great at school. And so what I'm like so thirsty for when I listen to you talk is that you have studied and you're incredibly knowledgeable from both an experiential perspective and from an academic perspective and a research perspective, which enriches a part of me that I want to be stronger in, but it's just not where like I naturally sit. So all of that is to say, I think that blended connection that we have is part of what was the catalyst. And I think that was actually like maybe not even a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like on top of the fact that you just have this magical energy it's lovely to be present for. But I think our collaborations in all of those capacities, in parenting, in fundraising AI, in our sector, is really about sort of our shared interest to learn from what's around us and then to collaborate with each other around them. And there's no real pride of ownership in the idea or the outcome or the connecting of the dots. Instead of there's just like a real celebration of how each of us does connect those dots and then what that leads to, right? That's at least how I sort of experience us in the last year together. And I think that's what our industry needs more of, right? Because with all the trust factor rankings being as low as they are for as long as they are, like to me, that's an indictment on the lack of authenticity in some of the work that we are bringing forward as an industry. And I think when you look at the turnover of staff in our industry, right, that can be misperceived sometimes. And I think our sector deserves to be known and celebrated for the authenticity that is there, right? It's actually what drives us. It's why people work in this space. It's why they pick the missions that they pick. And I think it will continue to come to bear in really cool and beautiful ways. And I think leadership like yours, and I hope on a good day leadership like mine, is like an accelerant for that, even more of it.
Yeah. And oh my gosh. Well, thank you for saying all of those kind things also. I'm also trying to get better at catching the ball. I really like that phrase. So, and to not be so uncomfortable when people say nice things. And I also, before we go on, I just want to say it's really interesting for me to hear that like academic piece for you, because I also was somebody who really struggled in school. I have ADHD. I've talked about that a lot, but I also had a IEP. I had a learning disability. I had a speech therapist when I was younger. Like I really did not excel in school. Whereas like my siblings were in, gate classes and skipping things and, all of that. And that, well, look at me now is really that I am very genuinely curious and mostly can learn in conversation. So my research has been done on this podcast with researchers who have shared stories and talked to me and connected with me. And so I think I just realized like at some point in my life, like I get to learn however I want now. And how I want to learn is in conversation. And so just to anybody else who feels like, I don't know, school wasn't for you, so some type of learning can't be for you. I mean, I have all that same history, and so,
me too.
And it's,
And it's interesting that, the language is constantly evolving, but what we used to call learning disabilities, some call now learning differences. And I think it's evolving even to a newer, more respectful terminology. But I like learning differences because for me, like I learn very differently. It's not good or bad. It's just different, right? If you sit me alone in a room with a book and tell me to read it and absorb everything that I read, I won't. But to your point, if you put me in a room with people and we read excerpts and we share and we talk about it, like I will consume and remember that forever. So I like this idea of now that we're older, we can decide how we learn. Like I don't have to take your Scantron test anymore. That's not how it works.
Yeah. I mean, somebody like last year, something called me smart. And I remember being like, wow, I don't have that identity. So like I spent, 20 years, like thinking very strongly that I was not smart, but I was all these other things and it was okay, but I like wasn't that smart. And then in college, like I had this one class where I was like, maybe I am kind of smart in this one way, because it was a class where you sat in a circle and you talked about things and you grappled with problems. And so I just think it's so interesting, these like limiting beliefs that kind of follow us around until we have these moments where either someone holds up a mirror to something for us or we see it modeled in a different way. And so I'm just grateful to like bring light to that too. Just another example of authenticity.
And how hard it is to lose it. Because like, I think you're incredibly smart. And yet I bet you that will be something that forever feels somewhat foreign as an identity for you to put on. Like it'll be a slightly uncomfortable hat because you, for so many years, it wasn't what your identity was, right? We all have little nits and bits of that along the way. But to your point, that's the piece that I think is really interesting. Our industry sets people up to leverage their superpowers. I've never talked about this, but what you just said just opened this up for me. Like, people are drawn to this industry because they're passionate about something, and usually not because they fit into some purely academic pathway of insert career with a very linear course to it, right? And yet we all have, as humans, incredible superpowers, right? And so I wonder if that's part of the magic of our industry of we are a little bit off the beaten path with these incredible superpowers that may not fit into the box of whatever industry the world has decided is one that will be valued and compensated. But as a result, when we come together, incredible things happen, right? I've never really thought about that in a literal way until just now, although subconsciously superpowers have always been part of the way I manage, the way I lead teams, the way I think of myself. So maybe there's something there. I don't know. That'll be our next podcast.
So there is, I don't think I've told this or
See?
mentioned this to you before, but okay. So neurodivergence.
Here we go. This is, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is the part where you're like, I'm not academic smart. Yes, you are, because here we
go. Okay, well, because of an incredible podcast episode that I had, I learned that people with neurodivergence have something called justice sensitivity, which means like we are more oriented towards work like this, which has made me, I haven't had the capacity to sort of explore this theme further, but it does make me wonder about what it looks like to support our workforce potentially differently than, or even more expansively than other workforces, knowing that we likely have a higher percentage of neurodivergent team members.
That is so interesting. And by the way, like, unlike the uncomfortable hat of being called smart, what you just described feels like the hat I've had for 25 years. Like, justice and like right and wrong and like balance and fairness feels so heavy and important to me. That is super interesting. Thank you for that.
So, I think
I didn't hear that podcast, so I'm not going back to the archive.
Yes, there's a 2-part podcast. I'll have to pull it up. We'll put it in the show notes too, all about neurodivergence. And okay, there's this other thing that I want to go back to that you were talking about because it relates to another theme that we wanted to touch on today, which is this piece around sort of our identities following us, and maybe even like our identities kind of stacking as we move our way throughout the ecosystem around social impact. And something I've said to you multiple times is like, I only got to know you in your current role, right? And I got to know you after you had come in as a sponsor for an initiative that I was helping to lead. And one of the things I've been so grateful for in our relationship is that there was never a dynamic to navigate around like a funded, like power dynamic in our relationship. And I was saying to you, like, I think like part of that is because of who you are. I think part of that is because you've sat in all these different seats and you see the intersection of all of these different types of entities coming together, trying to make impact together. And so I think it's related to that piece around like, there are pieces of our identity that always come with us. And when there are folks who have been deeply entrenched inside nonprofits that get to move into roles like yours, they don't lose their nonprofit advocate, the nonprofit advocate inside of them. And it changes so much about what it feels like then to work with you.
One, again, thank you. You know, it's interesting in that I would say to your point, to some degree, that's me. I've never been a super hierarchical person. I don't really buy into a lot of bureaucracy, titles and things like that have never felt important. I have, even from the time that I was probably really little, recognized that like leadership was a behavior, was a series of actions, not a, distinction and a piece of paper. This role was super interesting because to work for a company of this size and this caliber and this recognition, a lot of people have expectations and preconceived notions, which by and large, I find to be misinformed or underinformed. I mean, my experiences so far in the work that I've gotten to do the last 2 years in my role have not aligned with a lot of what people seem to perceive might be the reality of working in a company of this size with this focus. I think for me, there are a couple of things. One is the impact and the work continues to be what draws me. Like, I didn't go work for a division of AWS that serves, the automotive industry. Not because I don't think cars could be cool to serve, but because I'm not passionate about or know much about, right? So like, I did very much pick a team and a role and was fortunate enough to be allowed to come work for a group that is focused on the work of our industry. I will also say that the leadership principles that I mentioned before, they're not just like lanyard talk. They are really fundamental. And the first one that they always talk about is customer obsession. And so I think that customer obsession piece is what drives some of the way that I'm empowered to show up in conversations in this role, right? So you take like my inherent passion and belief and care, and to your point, experience and having been in different roles inside the industry to sort of know what's hard and what's frustrating and what's valuable maybe and what's not always so valuable. And then you couple that with a company that basically says, if you can demonstrate to me that this is in the best interest of the customer, then you have my support, right? The combination of those two things has been incredibly empowering and has allowed me to say yes to a lot of things that I think surprise people, have allowed me to say yes to things without any strings attached or sort of, to your point, any power dynamic at play, because it's not about that. And candidly, and this surprises some people too, it also like empowers me to say no to a lot of things. No to a lot of things that I think on the surface sometimes we as an industry think are valuable, but I think they actually oftentimes can be a little bit of a distraction for us. So that's a really unique combination that I have taken as a privilege, and I've taken a lot of responsibility around. And interestingly, in the first 2 years of my role, when I was like desperately trying to be a learner around this incredibly beautiful technology that I knew zero about before taking this job, I have taken it as a real responsibility to now craft what we call mechanisms, but what really are like frameworks and processes, so that becomes more ingrained in the way the company approaches this type of work ongoing, so that it's not a Kelley thing, which would not be helpful to the industry. It also wouldn't be helpful to AWS, right? But instead, it's taking the richness of what I've brought to the table, the richness of what AWS brings to the table, the richness of what all of the customers I get to interact with bring to the table, putting that together in a way that can both have scale and then also have sort of continuity over time. That is something that I've worked pretty hard at. And candidly, wasn't super valued at first, if I'm being honest, at AWS, right? There's a great saying that if you work here, you have to be comfortable being misunderstood for a really long time, which in this case was pretty true. Like, people are sort of like, why do you care about this? Why are you working on this? And it wasn't until probably the first part of this year, so almost 2 years in, that people are like, oh, now I get it. This is awesome. This is like way faster and we can do more. And customers are so excited. And so, yeah, I think that's probably been part of what's at play there.
Okay, we need to go down this a little bit farther, because I just was in a conversation yesterday with Justin McCord at RKD, and he said something to me. He was like, one of the things I like about you is like, you hold your convictions really like strongly, or something like that. And so I've been thinking, I've had the word conviction kind of rattling around in my head for the last 24 hours. And you just pointed to a time where you held to a conviction, like almost 2 years of being misunderstood. That's a long time to like not have kind of like an element of belonging validated, right? That like environment that you're in, like that takes a lot of conviction that what you're working on is good for customers, good for the sector, so how did you ride that wave? Because I think we need a lot more of that, like inner knowing and conviction and kind of like relentlessness in our sector.
That's a great question. So one, it was an incredibly long time, and it was hard. Like, it was not joyful. It's very hard to not feel like you're adding value in like a tangible way for an extended period of time, especially if you've been doing something a long time and you're sort of used to that, or if you're like me and like you're a super type A, neurodiverse, want to like have it all organized and clean. So there was some real questioning, especially because when you look at a company like AWS that is clearly quite successful without me having ever joined, you also then sometimes have to wonder, like, am I pushing a boulder uphill that I'm missing is not worth my time to push uphill, right? Like, is this the right kind of hard or the wrong kind of hard? Is a tough evaluation to figure out when you're in it and you're new and things are moving fast. And listen, in it, new things moving fast, that's just our industry. Like, that's not Amazon. That's like all of us are navigating that. I think there's a couple of things. And, you know, as I'm listening to myself talk, I've clearly started to drink some of the Kool-Aid, because there's a lot of like isms in working here that I just find very helpful. One of them is there's really everything's a we, right? And so I find that to be helpful if you detach yourself a little bit from something. So like, I thought this was important. Some people agreed, some people didn't. Some days it was a priority, some days it wasn't over the course of 2 years, right? But by detaching it from myself and my identity, and instead just letting it be a body of work or an idea that everyone came at and enriched, you, Justin, you know, people internally, people externally, then it kind of finds its own path, right? So I think some of it is about, I was convicted about continuing to represent what I thought I believed, with lots of room for other people to share what they believed or what their reaction was. And that's, again, like coming back to where you and I started. We're both learners. We're both collaborators. We both naturally are drawn to that. So I think surrounding yourself in your areas of conviction with other people like that, and then just create a little bit of space from it so that the thing, the idea, the strategy, the concept, the campaign, the position, whatever it is, can evolve into what it needs to. And sometimes that's a quick evolution and sometimes that's a long one. So I think that's part of it. The second thing that we talk about a lot when we're making decisions, the phrase that they use internally is it a one-way door decision or a two-way door decision? And most of the decisions we make in our work are two-way door decisions. Like, you can undo it. You know, you and I scheduled this podcast, something came up, we could reschedule it if we needed to, right? If we got on this call and someone said something and sneezed and we had to stop the podcast, we could not post it, right? Like, everything about this is a two-way door decision. Most of our work is two-way door decisions. And so in those cases, you can move a little bit faster with a little bit more learn and be curious, with a little bit more interest. If it's a one-way door decision, then you really want to slow down and you really want to, I think, get a framework. You want to bring in objectivity. You want metrics. But I think most of what we are navigating in our space is fluid. And so that allows the conviction to really just be more about the path for progress, the path for better than yesterday. And I am super convicted about that. So I'll always do that. And I am super convicted about hearing from others and about like letting something be enriched by what others have to bring to it. So probably those two things are my DNA, and then the rest falls around it.
But also, it sounds like, I don't know if patience is the right word, but just like a willingness to sit in a certain level of discomfort without knowing for sure. I mean, I think that sentence that you said, I wrote it down, is this the right kind of hard or the wrong kind of hard, is like just such an important question to bring to life that I think a lot of people ask at different points that I ask too, right? Is like, sometimes I'll read things like, I talk about alignment a lot. And sometimes I'll read things like, if it's feeling hard, then you're out of alignment, right? Or some like Instagram post about that. And I'm like, well, not necessarily, because sometimes staying in alignment means doing something hard that disappoints somebody else. Or it means saying no to something that does feel wildly uncomfortable because it's for future alignment. And so it's not always about like ease, right? Like we want that ease. And so when things get hard, we can so quickly go into, oh, this is wrong because it's hard. And I think for people to like switch, like I always joke that like I thought I was a bad fundraiser for so long because I wanted to throw up before major donor meetings. And I was like, there's no way that good fundraisers feel this way, right? I was just like, this feeling is wrong. And so it means I'm bad at this, definitely. And I think that reframe of that question, like, okay, this is hard. Is it the right kind of hard or the wrong kind of hard, is just such a like amazing.
And it's so hard to know, right? Because it's interesting as I'm listening to you talk, I will say, and now I'm going to have to do some self-reflection after this conversation today as to why. I would say I am a person who sits comfortably in discomfort. I'm not a person who needs everyone to agree. In fact, I would say that actually is a little bit off-putting to me. Like the Patrick Lencioni books, I don't know if you've read or done any of those work. They have great exercises, and I've done a couple of them as teams. Like there's one called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and they have all these like work, like what do you call them? Like, workshops that you do together. I don't like it when I sit in a room and everyone's just like validating each other, because I am drawn to making things better tomorrow than they were today. I'm not satisfied with today as an industry, for myself as a human, for the world that we live in. Like I do think, and I'll have to do some self-reflection on sort of what's driving that, but I am really drawn to this belief that we can evolve and we can improve as professionals, as humans, as parents, as friends, etc. So as a result, the sort of like complicit validation, not my jam. And to your point, then it's sort of to understand who in the room sits comfortably in discomfort, who in your team, who in your family, who in your friend group, right? That is maybe a superpower that you need to invoke. When do we need that superpower? Like, you and I talked about money earlier. Like I will talk about money in the very first call with someone I don't know, because it's not like I don't walk into a shopping store and pick something up and walk to the cash register without knowing how much it costs to decide if I'm going to want to buy it. Right? Like everyone has a budget. Every thing we buy has a value that's assigned to its cost. Like, why do we wait till so long to talk about those things? But I've come to appreciate it's because it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. Right? So when there's a financial conversation that needs to happen, I usually raise my hand because it doesn't make me uncomfortable to talk about that. I think we can do it with respect and dignity and transparency and all of those types of things. But Nathan's going to make fun of us right here, right now, because I'm about to ask you a question. So this question's a shout out to Nathan. Mallory, do you sit comfortably in discomfort?
I mean, I think, gosh, it's such a good question. I think I have built a toolkit to deal with my discomfort to be able to sit there. I think my natural inclination is to want to, like, if I think back before I had all these tools, was to like flee the discomfort in my body quickly. And I think I've realized that if I wanted to sort of change the way I showed up, if I wanted to be the leader I wanted to be, if I wanted to make the impact I wanted to make, it was going to require discomfort. And so I better build a toolbox to like sit my butt down and not move. And so I think that's what I did. But I think there's some really, really interesting alignment in what you're saying and how I feel, which is, and also it's so funny that you brought up Nathan, because I texted Nathan recently. I don't know what he said to me. And I said, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm never satisfied. And So it's so funny that you said that, because I think that is also how I feel unsatisfied. And not that I never feel proud or that I
Right.
never
It's always,
give
it could be
like
better.
positive thing, but it's like I am hungry for change, and it feels sometimes like insatiable,
Yeah.
because I feel like I know what is possible if we just keep going. And I want us to keep going. And so I think that now that I've built tools around discomfort, I think I feel discomfort a lot less, because I'm just like in motion, where I'm just sort of like, all right, we're running.
Almost like it's almost like it's worth it to you, right? Like sort of like
Yeah.
when you accomplish climbing a mountain or something, like you might be uncomfortable going up the hill, but when you get to the top, the views are worth it, right? I love what you're saying, because whereas sitting in the discomfort is something I think sort of came naturally to me, like it really did make me uncomfortable most of my, you're showing if it does make you uncomfortable today, don't worry. You can actually learn how to, for moments, get comfortable with it just enough so that you can sort of get to the view at the top of the mountain. But I suspect that, to your point, it's a reward element, right? It's like, is the outcome of sitting in this with someone worth what happens on the other end? And so, to your point, I won't sit in discomfort for no reason. But I will stand there and let hard, complicated conversations take place, to let people share things and let that just be without having to address it. Because I think back to like that sort of thing I need to reflect on. I am really focused on this optimism, well, this pride in what we've accomplished, and this optimism that we actually still have so much more that we can do. So there's something in that that must be what sustains me with that conviction in those moments. Now, the real question is like, why do people tolerate me through all of that? I guess if you were to interview a couple of my colleagues over the last 2 years, they'd be like, "Oof, those were some tough meetings with Kelley, where she was just like not letting up."
But like that, I mean, I agree. Like, back to your other point, like, we cannot just be each other's like yes people. Like I had this moment recently where I got some critical feedback about something that I had been thoughtful around, and everybody had given me positive reinforcement around. And then this one person whose opinion I really respect said something critical of it in a helpful,
Yeah.
loving way. But they were like, hey, I just want to bring this up. I'm kind of flagging this thing. And my friend, so then I was like, okay, like, I was like trying to like sit with my feelings around it, and like, do I think that he's right? And so I like asked some of my other friends, like, hey, I got this feedback, and everyone sort of jumped to like my quote unquote
Right.
rescue,
Rescue.
right?
Yeah.
And they were just like, no way, girl, you know better than him, and da da da. And I was like, and I was like, you guys, like,
Not helpful.
no, I love when people push me back. I love when they make me think more deeply about something. I love when they say, like, yeah, but what about this too? Like, if we're here to make the impact we say we're here to make, we have got to navigate uncomfortable, complicated conversations. The world is only getting more complicated. We are only going to be in positions of navigating more uncertainty than the day before. And I feel like if we build any skills as a sector, it's like like how we sit in discomfort, how we deal with fear and the unknown, how we come together to have each other's back, to like be bold and courageous and mess up and fix it and be accountable. Like, I feel like that's the skill set of the sector that we need to see. So I love that you lead with it.
There's one other thing that I think I would layer into all of those things we need to be, which is safe, right? Like, you create a safe space for someone to be able to say and give you that feedback, right? Very easy. I mean, think of how many times a day someone does something and or I'll speak for myself, I choose not to give the feedback, right? Because either the space doesn't feel safe, or because it just doesn't feel like it's going to be even process. Like, I don't care if it's taken or agreed with. It just doesn't even feel like it's going to be consumed on any level. So I do think that is one of those things that takes everyone showing up, or at least the two people or three people in the however many in the dynamic. Because if I don't create an environment in which the sharing is authentic and real and challenging and pulling on the different perspectives, then none of that ever comes to pass, which doesn't mean I just blindly take it, right? It's the old like adage, right? Do you want Mexican food or Thai? I don't care. Okay, great. Let's get Mexican. Oh, it turns out I really want Thai, right? Like, sometimes when someone challenges your thinking and you take the moment, you actually become more convicted in what you actually believe. And that process is still super valuable. But again, all of these things require space. They require white space on our calendars to be able to do that. They require relationship, right? Outside of this and this, right? So there are other layers to this. And to your point of like the world's only getting more complicated, you think about creating an environment today where someone gives feedback that allows for richer collaboration in an environment where two people have never sat in the same room together. Like, I have multiple colleagues that I don't sit in the same room with, but maybe once or twice a year, right? So how we are connecting as humans, like, this is why it's all so interesting. This is, I think, why I love so much the research work that you do, or that you incorporate into your thinking, is because we are at our core human. And it's impossible to separate that from the way we show up at work and the way we show up as professionals looking to have an impact in our industry. And so to me, the more I understand this, the more I can make or try to make better decisions around the way I show up, the way I can start to create boundaries for expectations and how I think others need to show up for us to collaborate well together, the more I can honor what the person that I'm supporting or serving may need from me. Like, it's not binary to me. I think they really are interconnected.
Oh my gosh. There's so much good advice in there. Really. I mean, really. And I like, we have to have a certain amount of space for anything new to come through, right? We're never going to have new opportunities, feelings, ideas in a schedule that is booked back to back to back to back in stress and pressure and all of those things.
Yeah.
And so I just think there's so many pieces of that people can pick the one thing they sort of like want to take by the reins and lean into in terms of their leadership. I'm looking at time and I'm like, oh my God, we could talk forever, but we are not allowed to. So is there any like final piece to all of this that you want to leave folks with today?
Well, I'll leave you with, again, a thank you. Please keep having these conversations for those of us that learn through listening to this, because I think it's so amazing. And also, I'm a processor, so being able to come and talk through, like, I had like 3 new things that came to my mind today. I'm like, wow, I've never thought of it that way before. So fun. I feel like you and I are just like sitting in your living room gabbing.
Yeah.
I think the couple of things that right this second are top of mind for me are to like bring a culture of celebration back to the work we do. We're not working we're not working in physical connectivity as much as we used to. Little things like a birthday that used to be in the, office kitchen, or, you could see that someone had just gotten off a great call and they were smiling ear to ear as they walked down the hallway, and you'd ask how they're doing. Like, we gotta bring the celebration back into our world. I just heard Amy Poehler in an interview recently said the hard thing about getting older is that joy doesn't just naturally appear in your life the way that it did when you were younger. You have to actually make room and make an effort to bring joy into your life the older you get. And I thought, like, ooh, that's heavy. And I kind of can't stop thinking about it. And so in our work, I feel like the joy is the celebration. How are we celebrating each other? How are we celebrating the wins? How are we bringing that energy forward? And then from that, I do think maybe there's something in the like, what is your superpower? How does that relate to what you want to be convicted around? And like, how can you protect and honor those things? That's sort of what I'm actually going to go think about is those were the two nuggets for me. It was like this concept of a superpower and this concept of conviction, and they feel really tightly connected in a way that if we're going to continue to move through the complication to create clarity and impact, we probably need to get even more curious about each of those for ourselves, for our teams, for either our constituents or our customers, depending on what work you're in. But I wonder if there's not something in that.
I love it. Part 2. Now we know our
Part
next
two.
topic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kelley, so much. Where should folks go to connect with you, learn more about you? I personally love all of the things that you post on LinkedIn, but let folks know.
Yeah, LinkedIn's great. That's probably the best way to catch up and to just keep sharing. So thank you again for having me. And thank you for what you opened the door to almost a year ago. I'm super grateful for our friendship, our collaboration, and all the things I learned from you.
Likewise.